how do you make a successful program? How do you reach out? How do you connect with CRBs? We've given you pretty high level suggestions, but we're going to go into more detail about some of the things that have been really successful and some of the ways that you can reach out to CRBs to build your program. So to start off with, one of the things that we truly do understand is how difficult it is to connect with CRBs. You are trying to connect with CRBs. We are also trying to connect with CRBs so that we can give referrals to our financial institutions. So we honestly understand how difficult it is to just go out there and get CRBs, bring them in, to connect with them. It's not necessarily an easy culture to break. You know, if you think about it, it's been a group of people that have been really pushed out of the mainstream for a very long time. And so they don't necessarily have strong relationships outside of their industry. So how do you connect with them? How do you find them? What are some of the novel and interesting ways that financial institutions are bringing in CRBs? So one of the first ones is education. So Stacy, if you want to start and talk a little bit about what financial education would look like and why would that be helpful to bring CRBs in?
Absolutely. I think about this the same way I think about first-time homebuyer seminars. Um, for a while, I mean, we did this as an industry where we went out and said, "Hey, folks that are buying homes the first time, they don't know all the things that they don't know, and let's help them out." And through that advocacy, you sort of gain some fans. The same thing applies to cannabis businesses. They have not generally been able to work with financial institutions, and they don't understand why a financial institution is going to ask them for all of this information and monitor that activity on a day-to-day basis. They've never seen that with any other business they've worked at. So hold workshops and say, this is how you work with a financial institution. This is why this information is important. This is how you establish that relationship, and help them kind of gain some footing in this area that's new to everybody.
And I think that goes back to the issue of some of the pushback that you might get of, why are you charging me so much? It's so expensive. Why can't I have access to everything? I think that education goes a long way to help them understand that some of these restrictions are not just because you want to punish them for being in cannabis, but because there are certain things that you either can't do or that are very expensive for you to do, that you do have a big compliance burden. People will be more understanding of the structures you put in place around your program if you start educating them around how that looks. I'll also say that we have a financial institution that is really looking to corner the market in one of the new southern states. And they have decided that one of the things that will attract people in is by co-sponsoring cannabis education events. So this financial institution has already had a webinar with a local cannabis association. That local cannabis association had those connections with those CRBs and those potential entrepreneurs. So they all got together on a webinar, and it just boosted that visibility of that financial institution. That financial institution is also interesting in potentially going another step beyond that and offering to underwrite education for the cannabis businesses. So if you have someone who is new at the business, who's going to be, what's sometimes called a bud tender, the person who's actually, making the sale in a dispensary, and you want them to be knowledgeable about the product, there are a lot of educational programs you can send them to. This financial institution realized, hey, if we do that, it's a relatively low cost way for us to honestly make the customers better, make sure that they're more compliant. So I have a friend who hates the phrase win-win, but it is very much a win-win kind of scenario. The financial institution boosts their profile. The cannabis business gets access to more education. And then the financial institution knows that this is going to be a compliant, strong business. And then if we think about events, one of the things about events is that, we suggest folks at financial institutions go out and look for what's going on in your neighborhood. But I also realize that it's not that easy to know what's going on in your neighborhood. If you Google cannabis, you're not going to get a lot of results about things that are actually happening, because Google takes a sort of oddly applied hard line against cannabis and marijuana content. It exists, but they don't often make it available through their search engine. You don't often see advertisements in mainstream media publications about it because of restrictions. So, where do you even start? So, I spoke with one of my colleagues who has a professional history in cannabis businesses, and she said, honestly, Eventbrite is a great place to go. She calls LinkedIn and Eventbrite the search engines for cannabis because they're both places where people can talk about these things freely and they can publish these events. So Eventbrite is a great opportunity to find what's going on in your neighborhood. One of the things this person has said is the most important thing a financial institution can do is to show up, to physically be there. Because again, this is a culture that has been really inward looking. And so you need to meet them where they are. And if it's something like a cocktail hour, or if it's something like a conference, those are the kind of places you should be going. You need to show your face. This person also said, think about financial institutions just like their other vendors. How do other vendors get into a dispensary? They physically show up on the doorstep and ask to speak to the general manager or speak to the owner. Those are the ways that you make those connections. Stacy, do you have any other kind of recommendations on how people can find good cannabis-focused industry events to attend?
Yeah, I mean, I think subscribing to newsletters that are local to your area, cannabis industry, working groups. There's one in Boston, Canna MGT, I think it is, and they're always, supporting events and bringing folks together, and they send out newsletters on the regular. You can also follow groups on industry groups on LinkedIn, and then I think one of the other there are lots of things that cannabis businesses and financial institutions have in common, and one of those things is community support, particularly in states where they require cannabis businesses to give back to the community some of their profits. And you'll find that those cannabis businesses will pick a nonprofit to support for that month or that year. And banks often do the same thing. So why not team up and find a common cause and get your name out there as cannabis friendly? So those are some ideas I had.
And I also like the idea of allowing folks to use your facilities. Now, one of the things that we've also heard from CRBs is that they place a high premium on the face-to-face time. They do want to have a financial institution they can go into. They do want to be able to ask questions. And so if you allow cannabis businesses or people from cannabis businesses access to your branches, to your facilities, then that is another great way for them to get to know you, to get to trust you. And word of mouth is the most powerful tool you have in this industry to get the quality cannabis businesses. Because if you think about it, they're not going to recommend one of their peers that runs a bad business. They're not going to send you someone that will reflect poorly on them. So the more you can get in front of cannabis folks, the more you can get them into your orbit, the better off you'll be and be able to build that word of mouth pipeline.
I think one of the key things there is treat them like you would any other customer. They know if you're treating them differently, if you're having them come to the back door or you're not talking about your relationship publicly, they start to feel different about the relationship.
Yeah. And also that visibility extends to events. I know that there has been some reluctance previously based on perceived reputation risk of raising your hand and saying you're involved in cannabis. But if you raise your hand and publicly, put out the webpage, Stacy mentioned this, do something to get your name out there. But it's not enough to be passive in terms of, well, here's a card, here's a handout. One of the things that has been very effective for our financial institutions is to show up to those industry events, to sponsor them, to get their name out there, to get that brand recognition going. So we have a very specific example. Stacy, do you want to talk about what happened at NECAN?
Uh, the NECAN in Boston?
Yeah, the NECAN in Boston. Yeah.
Yeah, so we had an institution who showed up at the event, put up a booth, and had a tremendous amount of interest just by having them out there publicly saying, "Hey, we're here at a cannabis event," and I believe they sponsored like the morning coffee, right? So everybody that was going around and getting a coffee and grabbing a donut saw sponsored by a video bank, right? So it's a way to uh, gain visibility. And, there's another example that is happening in the near future. There's a golf tournament in our area that is part of a week-long cannabis event, and they're looking for sponsors. So why, golf and bankers, right? They go together. Why not sponsor the the ninth hole uh, refreshments or whatever that, I'm not a golfer. So, uh, there are some opportunities there so that when folks in the industry that are working through these industry events do see your brand present.
And the last thing I will say is I understand that there may be some reticence to attend industry events because of, are people going to be consuming cannabis? Am I not going to be welcome? Am I going to stick out like a sore thumb? I don't have a tie-dye t-shirt, all of those things about it's the same as going to anywhere you've not been before. These folks are not here to exclude you. Honestly, everything we've seen in real life is that people are super excited to see folks from financial institutions. Stacy has even experienced CRBs saying, I didn't think banking was even possible. You still hear that in this day. So if you go out there, don't be afraid to go to industry events. Yes, there may be people who have consumed, but if these are indoors, people are not allowed to consume indoors and no one's going to force anything on you. I would also just add to that as one last thought. You will come to realize that maybe these people are more normal than you thought. I remember the first time I ever visited a dispensary, I don't know what I expected. I expected it to be like full of blacklight posters and Bob Marley music, but it was nicer than any spa I've ever been to. It was beautiful, it was open, there was no smell, everyone was super nice. And you can intellectually realize, oh yeah, they're just normal people, but nothing drives that home like actually meeting them and understanding that there are some people in the industry that don't consume cannabis at all. There are many owners and backers where cannabis consumption is not necessarily why they're there. So expose yourself to these folks, and I think that will help you realize that these are just normal, responsible business people like anybody else.
Great point.
Oh, this was just a quick example to show you in Eventbrite. If you just type in cannabis and Boston, this was something that popped up. I don't know anything about these folks, but there were dozens. So you will not be hurting for opportunities if you just type cannabis into Eventbrite. I also asked this person who worked at a dispensary, what was compelling about the bank that they chose? What was it that really made them go with this one financial institution over another? And they felt very strongly that what made them decide to go with the bank they did was that the bank also reached out to their employees. So they weren't just looking at it as a business relationship. They also said, hey, if you open an account, we will give free checking accounts to all of your employees. Plus, they were willing to offer essentially like a $200 signing bonus to these employees to sign up to have an account. Now, there is a little bit of an outlay there, but ultimately, for what is the cost of acquisition of a customer? If you can get a bunch of folks in for $200 a piece, if that's a way to get a CRB in your doors, if that's a way to generate goodwill among their employees that will then go and talk to folks at other businesses, they felt it was extremely worth it. And the person from this cannabis business actually thought that that was, went above and beyond, and they really respected that. I would also suggest, in terms of employees, that financial institutions bring someone into the program that is actually from the cannabis industry. Now, going back to the fact that we at GreenCheck absolutely understand how difficult it is to attract CRBs if you're not a cannabis business, we have taken this approach as well. We have very intentionally gone out recently and hired folks on our team that are from cannabis, that have worked in dispensaries, that have worked in grow facilities, because we know that they speak the language that we don't. And they can tell us things like, yes, you should go to this event. It's worth the money, or nobody goes to that event, or here's something that one of the other financial institutions is offering that I heard about. Maybe you should do something different. It's also a great way to do that business development outreach part. You really need to make sure you have someone there who speaks cannabis. And it's not that we can't learn it. There's tremendous value in having someone that comes from that industry. So, Stacy, do you see folks doing that at financial institutions at this point? Is there any kind of recruiting from the cannabis side of the world?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just the basic, if I'm hiring tellers, I'm looking for people with retail and cash handling experience, and bud tenders have that in spades. But beyond that, uh, actually, one of my latest employees was in the cannabis industry. She was managing a dispensary, and she was hired by a financial institution to run their cannabis program because she had that management experience and retail experience, and understood the financial aspects of it. And now she's working at Green Check, right? So she there. I have seen that a number of times. It's great to cross pollinate there. There's some shared skills.
Yeah, if you want people who know how to deal with cash, get people who worked in cannabis. Nobody deals with cash like they deal with cash.
And customers. They need to deal with customers too.
And customers, a wide array of customers.
Right.
All right. So we do have one last opportunity for Q&A. We'll leave it open, but I think, Stacy, we can wrap it up for folks if we want to go through our last couple slides.
All right. So we do want to give you sponsored by Green Check, right? Because we've been doing these boot camps for quite a while, and we do spend just a couple of seconds here at the end letting you know that if you want to consider building a cannabis program, we will take you through the process that we described earlier. We'll help you build out the tools that you need to make those decisions. And if you do build a program, we do have software that goes along with that to make your program more efficient.